Hi, everyone. We're going to take another episode on the law applicable to Gentiles. Episode 8 is entitled, Does the Call to Covenant in Deuteronomy 29 Mean the Covenant Inside the Ark of the Covenant? And you're going to see I received a commentary that said if you look at Deuteronomy 29, the word covenant is expansive. In essence, he's implying, therefore, all 613 commands within the Torah apply to a son of Israel, son of a sojourner, as much as it does to a son of Israel. But let's see if the context of this is only true of the 10 commandments, because the word covenant does not mean the 613 commands. It means only, if the Torah is the 613 commands, but not the covenant. The covenant is a much narrower set of commands. So let's take a look. And I'm going to introduce all of you to a book called Commentary on the Torah by Richard Elliott Freeman. He's a Jewish scholar. This is the top Jewish commentary today. In the order of Rashi's, a lot of Jewish people believe this is the same level and even better. And it's an easy to understand English. It's soft bound. You could have it shipped to $1 scan, and they can turn it into a PDF. You can then have it OC scanned, and then do what I did. I put the word covenant into my OCR search, and I went through all the times the word covenant appears throughout the Torah, and that's how you're going to see the lesson. I will show to you today. Is I'm just going to show you all these quotes. I'll put them on screen capture Friedman's book, and you can see it for yourself. All right. So hopefully this will be educational and helpful to us. And it is not a minor issue, because the number one issue of the Pauline camp to defeat Jesus is to say, hey, if you get rid of Paul, you now have 613 commands on your back. And they make it sound like an unbearable burden. And so if we are exaggerating or allowing an exaggerated interpretation of God's law to make the Levitical code is the highest level of holiness and purity, and then in the middle is the sons of Israel, and at the bottom are the sojourners. If we make it look like all the Levitical commands apply and all the sons of Israel commands apply to the sojourner equally, even though God makes a distinction in many, many cases, that's not true. We've shown that so far with a couple of passages that were the one law passages, but they didn't say that in context. We would then be feeding the beast. We'd be feeding the Pauline beast, and we wouldn't be dismantling it. We'd actually be feeding the beast and making it bigger and more powerful, because we're conceding something we should never concede. You always have to follow God's law and word the way it reads, and you cannot imagine things that aren't actually written into the text. You can't imagine the word covenant means something you think it means. You have to go test it and research, what is that word mean, covenant? And I would never, ever use any book written by any Christian at all to know what the word covenant is. I'm going to go to the Jewish people, like Zechariah 8:13 says, that in the end of days, we're going to cling to a Jew and say, you have the word of God. That's the problem. We don't know Hebrew, and we need to turn to the Jewish people who know their word and they know what it means. So please stick around. I'll try to keep it really short. I'm just going to read these things, and then you can make your own assessment and decision. All right. God bless. We'll continue now. All right. So in response to my argument that you have to read things in context, he says, yes, let's read the context. So that's a good point. Let's see what context he wants us to read. This is Deuteronomy 29, verse 10. And he says, context is right, and you are leaving out multiple commands by the Father for strangers to enter covenant with him, which means following Torah as an Israelite. So he's now equated covenant with the entire 613 commands of Torah. So that's a big leap, isn't it? You got to prove that. Let's see if what he quotes proves that. Deuteronomy 29:10. You stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God. He doesn't tell me what version it is, but I'm going to assume it's probably King James because of the ye there. Ye stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your captains of your tribes, your elders and your officers, and all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, and thy stranger that is in your camp, from the ewer of thy wood unto the drawer of thy water, that thou shouldest enter into covenant with the Lord thy God, and into his oath, which the Lord thy God makes with thee this day, that he may establish thee today for a people unto himself, and that he may be unto thee a God, as he has said unto you, and as he has sworn unto the fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And so I'm going to stop there. The next is irrelevant, because that's simply saying the law will be read aloud to the sojourners as well as the Israelites. Well, we're going to be asking, what does the word covenant mean, when they would have heard this first? So that doesn't prove anything. Just reading a command to read the law to everyone doesn't mean it applies equally. The Levites have to decide, hey, it says Levite, and the sons of Israel go, well, I'm not a Levite. So you could read it and still listen and know it doesn't apply to you. So this doesn't prove anything. But 29:10, he's saying the word covenant means all 613 commands. So let's test it. Let's look at Friedman. Let's look at a Jewish source that has no axe to grind in favor of Paul or anything. Let's see what they think it is. Okay, so before I get into this, the word covenant is used later in Isaiah. So we also need to know what the word covenant meant in Torah to understand what it means in Isaiah. In Isaiah, it's very important because he actually says salvation for the foreigners, meaning us sojourners, depends upon us doing two things: keeping Shabbat and observing the covenant, adhering to the covenant. Let me read that to you so you have the context of that. Also, the foreigner who joins themselves to Yahweh to serve him and to love Yahweh's name, to be his servants, everyone who keeps the Sabbath from profaning it and holds fast my covenant, and the succeeding words are, will be welcome into the holy mountain. So this is important because we need to know, what does it mean to hold fast to my covenant? Okay? And here it is in a bigger picture. Okay. Welcome in my holy mountain, the foreigners who keep the Sabbath from profaning it and hold fast my covenant. What does that mean? So, in the commentary on the Torah, I extracted these principles and I give you the page sites, but we're actually going to show you the page sites so you have absolute confirmation of what these opening paragraphs are. And so I ask, what is the term covenant meaning? Friedman, the top Torah translation today by a top conservative scholar in commentary on Torah, including a new translation, says it is the Ten Commandments. Quote, the Ten Commandments are the text of the covenant between God and Israel. He says this at page 234. Friedman explains at page 234, quote, in Exodus, the people pledged their obedience, 24 verses 3 and 7, and the covenant text is deposited in the Ark of the Tabernacle. And I think that he means Exodus 40, verse 20. End of quote. This is clear from the passages in Exodus 24, which is known as the first version of the Ten Commandments. Remember, then they were on stone that was smashed by Moses when he was upset about their doing the calf worship. And then there's a rewriting of it in Exodus 34. So there's two deliveries of the Ten Commandments in the law, if you don't know that. And so in verse 34, it's the rewriting of the Ten Commandments. Then if we continue here at the bottom, first in Exodus 24, we read, so now we're going to look at the first version. And he took the scroll of the covenant. So there you have the term used relating to what's the scroll. What's the scroll? That's the Ten Commandments. So it was written down. And this is going to now be handled at that time and read into the people's ears. And they said, we'll do everything that Yahweh has spoken and we'll listen. So by the way, that means they were all taking an oath. Those who think oaths are evil and wrong, I'm sorry, you're wrong. And Jesus was, there was a corruption in the Bible where not a corruption, but an accident where Jesus said, you may not take an oath falsely. And the word falsely was dropped off by accident. And then it said, you cannot take an oath. And then you have people like Brenda. We've had that whole thing with Brenda. She's, oh, you can't take an oath. You can't be an attorney. You know, if you're an attorney and take an oath to pledge allegiance to the flag, whatever it is, you're going to hell. Well, that's not what Jesus said. And if it were, Jesus said that he would be himself negating the entire law because they took an oath right there. Just saying. And verse 8, and Moses took the blood and threw it on the people. And he said, here is the blood of the covenant. There's the word again. And Yahweh has made, that Yahweh has made with you regarding all these things. Likewise, in Exodus 34, 27, 28, we read, quote, and Yahweh said to Moses, write these words for yourself because I've made a covenant with you and with Israel based on these words. That's the Ten Commandments in context, Exodus 34, the second delivery, remember? And he was there with Yahweh 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat bread and he did not drink water. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the Ten Commandments. See Friedman's commentary on Torah at 42. And he talks about the Israelite or Sinai or Mosaic covenant is Exodus 20 and chapter 34 and Deuteronomy 5 and also chapter 7 at verses 12 to 15. At page 234, he says the Ten Commandments are the text of the covenant between God and Israel. All right, so that's an overview, a real quick overview, but now I'm going to show you so you have no doubt. I'm not just making this stuff up. I'm going to show you screen captures of what he says, and actually it's a little more expansive, and that's helpful for us to get greater context. So what you always want to do is expand a little bit beyond the question you're looking at. What other covenants are there in the law? And we're going to see there's several, and it's very interesting what they are. Okay, so on page 42, Friedman describes all the covenants. So when he sees the covenant of Noah, I think it is, he pauses and he says, what are the covenants to come? And so he says this, covenant. I think this is Genesis 9, verse 9. He's making a comment on covenant. The flood event concludes with a contract between the deity and humans. A covenant, the Noahide covenant, is the first of four major covenants that provide the structure in which nearly all the Bible is framed. The exceptions, most notably the book of Job, are relatively few. The Noahic, I don't know how to pronounce that, Noahic covenant promises the security of the cosmos. The Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 15 and 17, promises the land of Abraham's descendants and makes Yahweh their God. The Israelite or Sinai or Mosaic covenant is in Exodus 20 and chapters 34, Deuteronomy 5 and Deuteronomy 7, verses 12 to 15, promises well-being in the promised land. And the Davidic covenant, 2 Samuel 7 and Psalm 89 and Psalm 132, promises kingship over Jerusalem and Judah to David and his descendants. So when we are saying we are that Jesus fulfilled the Davidic covenant, we're saying he fulfilled 2 Samuel 7. And please look at 2 Samuel 7, my friends, and tell me if that doesn't give you some chills to understand that when we say that Jesus could be born without having a father who was from the tribe of David, that we're insisting you're going to reject all my evidence that up through 180 AD, it always said son of Jesus was a son of Joseph. It's in the oldest New Testament ever recovered by Agnes Lewis, and it's from the 180 period. I mean, literally, the text has that archaic in the sense it's the earliest New Testament we have, and that's what it used to say, and that was corrupted in the 180s. And then the Ebionites had to hire an expert Symmachus to rebut these other arguments. Just saying, we don't realize the Jewish people are looking at the Davidic covenant at a verse, a passage, that we have a Bible that they can't accept Jesus as the Messiah because we're unwilling to go back and review the evidence I've assembled. And there's 10 other references in the early Christianity before 180 AD in writing, in books and epistles and letters that all reference that Jesus was born of Joseph. And you can even see it in the New Testament where, John says the family of Jesus rejected Jesus when he was trying to teach. Why would that be if they had this, virgin birth? But I'm digressing. I'm sorry. But that's why I think this is helpful to see all the covenants in one big picture. And we need to reassess that other Davidic covenant. Is that been fulfilled? And if it hasn't been fulfilled, we're following the wrong guy. That's all I have to tell you. You cannot get away from that. You have to be willing to reassess that evidence. That's all I'm saying. And I've given plenty of evidence. There's plenty of videos out there to prove this. And even Deut, one of the top commentators on the Bible, agrees with me. He actually, in 1905, made this strong argument we need to get rid of this corruption. And he said it's an absolute true corruption. So you have a top dog commentator, knows Hebrew and all of the history of the Bible, and he wants to change it. And so I'm just coming along and saying, hey, we forgot about what this guy said. Let's revive attention to what he's saying and fix our Bibles one of these days. Anyway, Friedman, page 234, 20, verse 1. God spoke all these words. God speaks the words of the Ten Commandments aloud directly to the people. The Ten Commandments are the text of the covenant between God and Israel. There's the word covenant again. One of the most fruitful discoveries of biblical research was the independent recognition by three scholars, such and such, in the 1950s, that there is a formal similarity between the Israelite covenant and international legal documents of ancient Near Eastern countries. So, pause. Friedman is saying is there's external evidence from other cultures that the way this covenant was made with Israel is exactly the same way this procedure would be followed in other Middle Eastern countries at that time following legal protocol. The treaty documents dictated by regional kings, suzerains, to the local city kings, vassals who were subject to them, formalized the relationship between the two. They regularly included a specific group of formal elements. See, so he's saying God used the word covenant deliberately because it's a term of art in that culture of the Middle East of that time. He continues. The Near East, page 335. The Near Eastern suzerainty treaties also include other features that appear here in the covenant. They included an oath sworn by the vassals pledging fidelity to the suzerain and to the requirements of the treaty, and they included provisions for the treaty document requiring that it be deposited in a sacred place. Pause. Do you see that the other cultures also used an oath? And again, Brenda, I hope you're watching this. He's saying that's the analogy. This Ten Commandments was sworn by an oath when it was done, that people had to swear they would keep and promise to keep it. And so that proves that when Jesus said, and it's the corruption or the inadvertent dropping of two words or a couple words, where it says, "Do not make any oath," okay, and it said originally falsely, and that's key. And then so Jesus looks like he's contradicting Yahweh. See, so but the Paulinists love that, and they will definitely do that. And then Brenda, you fell right into a trap, and you ended up destroying Jesus, not wittingly. But that's what you and I had a debate about. I hope by now you have watched the video I gave you, sent you, and you will one day take down your video saying it's a sin to take oaths. Because if it is, then God's word says that everybody sinned by taking an oath to him in obliging themselves to keep the Ten Commandments. I trust, Brenda, you will not stick by your old view and finally come around to see the light. In Exodus, the people pledged their obedience. 24, that's Exodus 24, verses 3 and 7. And the covenant text is deposited in the Ark of the Tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant. It's also called, this is Exodus 25, verses 16 and 21, Exodus 40, verse 20. Let's continue. Okay, now here's the oath that Brenda says is a sin for anybody to do, and Jesus condemned it, right? But that's not what he said. That's what it looks like because of a mistake in transcription, which is provable by looking back at the earliest text through earlychristianwritings.com. Anyway, Exodus 24, verse 6 to 8. Verse 6, and Moses took half of the blood and set it in the basins and threw half of the blood on the altar. And he took the scroll of the covenant and read it in the people's ears. And they said, "We'll do everything that Yahweh has spoken and we'll listen." And that's what Friedman referred to as an oath. Verse 8, and Moses took the blood and threw it on the people. And he said, "Here is the blood of the covenant that Yahweh has made with you regarding all these things." So covenants had to be also sealed with blood. Do you remember what Jesus says in the Last Supper? He says, "This is a new covenant in my blood given for you and the transgressors." So Brenda and anybody else who believes oaths are illegal and illicit because of this mistake in a transcription of part of the book of Matthew, then you would be saying here that God is using the blood of the atonement, blood of the covenant here in a way that would be inconsistent, meaning this is definitely to seal an oath. That's what the suzerainty treaties were talked about by Friedman before. So what do we see here is that an oath could be confirmed by blood, and that's what Jesus was doing. So what did that mean? When you and I enter the new covenant, if we don't enter a covenant with Jesus, an oath to keep that covenant, the new covenant, which what does it say? I'm going to put my Torah, Jesus is going to put the Torah of God on our hearts, okay? And you're going to say, well, that's all the Torah. No, no, no. Don't go crazy. You got to look at what I'm saying. Jesus doesn't say I'm going to abolish the distinction between sojourners and sons of Israel. So don't over exaggerate it again. But that's what Jeremiah 31 verse 31 says is the new covenant, that God, Yahweh, is going to put my Torah on your hearts, more proximate through people, through Jesus who uses parables. And that makes it more memorable. So anyway, this is very interesting. So you get to know clearly there was an oath involved here. And that has that other significance, that this corruption of the New Testament by a mistake, I believe it was a mistake, just dropping one word is easy to do. And it gives a false impression that any oath is wrong. And then you have people, who say, I will only affirm, I won't swear an oath. But if you won't take an oath to God to keep the new covenant, then you are not part of God. So you have to take the oath, Brenda. Eventually, accept God's word. You're gonna keep fidelity to that command, and that's what the new covenant has to be about, right? Okay, so next we're going to read from Exodus, and we're going to see how the word covenant was used. Was it used to talk about all 613 commands in the Torah that are coming, or was it the Ten Commandments. And Yahweh said to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and I'll write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered, and be ready for the morning, and you shall go up in the morning mountain. Okay? And Yahweh, now that's verse 1, and this is later in the same passage, verse 27. So now God's explaining more. And Yahweh said to Moses, write these words for yourself, because I've made a covenant with you and with Israel based on these words. Verse 28, and he was there with Yahweh 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat bread, and he did not drink water. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, not Torah, covenant. And then it specifically says in Hebrew, the 10 commandments. What is the covenant? The 10 commandments. It says so right here. And okay, let's continue. Now, Friedman will comment on that at page 293 of the book in his footnote here, and I've highlighted in yellow. We'll read it. The 10 commandments. The second set of commandments appears here in verses 14 to 26. 3 of them are similar to the commandments that appear in Exodus 20. The commandment against bowing to other gods, that's 34 verses 14 to 16. The commandment against molten gods, that's verse 17. And the commandments to cease work on the seventh day, verse 21. The other 7 are different from the 10 commandments that God speaks aloud over Sinai. In critical biblical scholarship, we understand these 2 versions of the Decalogue to come from 2 different ancient sources. Okay, so he's going through why are there variants between the 2. I would just simply say that God could be clearing it up or making it more expansive or whatever. It doesn't mean they're really 2 sources. It's simply he gets a chance to say it a little differently, and so he amends it and keeps changing it. So really the second set here is truly the final version, although it's important to see the original version in chapter 20. So I hope we can see that the word covenant in Deuteronomy 29 that this gentleman was referencing, and that's over here, J. Webb, or I think it's a man, I don't know, it could be a woman. And he's saying the context is right, and you're leaving out multiple commands by the father of strangers to enter covenant with him. But he equates it with following Torah, and that's false. As an Israelite, false. They're not committed to Israelites, you see? They are covenant partners in this covenant, and they're still called strangers. They're not called sons of Israel. They're not at all called that. In fact, it's disproven by the very thing it says, your wives and your stranger in your camp. If they're all Israelites, why is he calling them strangers? He's distinguishing. God is distinguishing him from those who are sons of Israel. So his premise is incorrect that they've been converted into Israelites. No, it doesn't say that. It's simply they are cooperating in the same oath that is made by the sons of Israel. The strangers made the same commitment to the 10 commandments in that context. And that tends to prove to me why God says here in Isaiah 56:6 that those Gentiles or sojourners who keep hold on to fast my covenant, including the Sabbath, they are welcome in my holy mountain. Why did God do that? Because they had fulfilled the 10 commandments that they were subject to. And again, I can't rewrite Isaiah to say more than that. It saves you. So I can't tell you. I mean, I can tell you there are all kinds of commands that you could argue apply to a sojourner. But how many of those, if you sinned against them, you're not going to heaven? See, I mean, that's another thing. This seems to make it or imply that if you kept the 10 commandments faithfully, God would accept you in the holy mountain under the covenant as it existed prior to Jesus. And again, there's a new covenant, which will be God's going to put your Torah on his heart. And Jesus, being the prophet of Deuteronomy 18, can expand that and explain that even more, right? So we have to, look at that's a whole nother issue. What are the commandments of Jesus that is distinct from the issue of what did the law say applied to the Gentiles? And I would say the law and prophets, looking at Isaiah, made it very clear the salvific aspect of it, the commands that are absolutely essential to be saved, had to be the 10 commandments. If you kept those, you would be welcome into my holy mountain. And that included keeping Shabbat. Now, I just want to say this to you. That means there could be, let's say there's 1,000 commands that the Gentile would have to keep, law said, but they were optional in the sense that you don't go to hell by not keeping them, okay? Because here, this seems to be saying this is going to be your entry into heaven if Jesus hasn't come yet. You can do the 10 commandments, keep the Shabbat, and you are welcome into my holy mountain. Jesus even quotes this text where it says, my house will be a house of prayer for all nations. So Jesus quotes Isaiah 56. So he knew about it. He didn't say, this was wrong or whatever. So I would say that Jesus can amend or add to, not the individual commands, he can extend them out to another class if he wants to. He can say this applies, as a command to everybody. So a lot of his commands are universal, but that's a whole nother question, how to construe Jesus. But again, I want to get back to the law applicable to Gentiles. So, because that's the main number one argument of the Pauline camp to defeat the idea that we can test Paul, and anybody would want to, in the right mind, get rid of Paul. Oh my gosh, how can we get rid of Paul? We'd have to follow all the law, these thousands of laws. But if this is true, you can honestly tell people that the entry point to heaven, according to Isaiah, prior to Jesus, would have been this level of obedience to God. After Jesus has come, I would argue there's another 100 commands that Jesus stated universally. Actually, there's 120. But anyway, he's given over 100 commands to everybody. It's a universal prophet. And that's also in the Deuteronomy passage. It said God was going to send this special prophet. And it was stated to be he's going to require all people to follow it. And if they don't obey this prophet, the special prophet, God would hold them accountable. Basically, you'd be judged by God for not obeying Jesus. Anyway, so I hope that helps everybody see the word covenant does not mean Torah, as this man said. He clearly said it meant the same thing. You are leaving out multiple commands by the Father for a stranger to enter covenant with him, which means following Torah. No, 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 no. That is an exaggeration and false. And I don't mean that in a bad, to condemn you. This is what you've been brainwashed by the one law of people, one Torah, because they don't read everything. And the context of the law requires you to know what the word covenant meant. And since you can see now that it doesn't mean what you think, you can't equate covenant with Torah at all. See, can't do that. Don't do that. And don't exaggerate for the obligation on Gentiles. You're just feeding the beast. You're feeding the Pauline monster that will never let go if you and I exaggerate what God's word says. All right, God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye.